Come on, come on, foot to the floor. You're not even at the hill yet! Get to the hill! Come on, foot to the floor. I've got a fun one for you today because we're answering a question that I get all the time. Do you need all-wheel drive to take you to the cool remote locations? Well, to answer that question, I've brought a 2020 Toyota CHR, a crossover only available in front-wheel drive, and we're going to take it a little bit off-road to see if this new crossover can get us to a really cool campsite, because that's kind of why you buy a crossover. Of course, I know this Toyota CHR is not a hardcore off-roader, but the fact of the matter is, when you come to a state like Colorado, you see these small crossovers everywhere doing all sorts of outdoorsy things, if you know what I mean. So for example, you'll see HRVs and Nissan Kicks all over the place at campsites and at bike parks and at kind of, you know, cool trailheads for hiking. And oftentimes those areas are off of the beaten path. So you gotta know, is this crossover gonna take you abuse to get you where you need to go? And can it do it with just the front wheels clawing at the ground? Well, that's what we're gonna find out today. This CHR has a 2-liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine with 144 horsepower and 139 pound-feet of torque. Hang on, I've got to do the hood prop dance here. Oh, there we go. Now this engine is mated to a CVT transmission, and here in the United States, you can only get that CVT transmission to power the front wheels. However, abroad they do have an all-wheel drive version of this very car, so that leads me to the question, why not bring it here to the US? I think it would sell like hotcakes, because there is this expectation that if you get a small crossover like this over something like a small hatchback such as the Yaris, the crossover is going to take you further. It's going to get you to the cool hiking spots, and I'm not so sure this 2-liter CVT will. Now for the first test, I've got this steep little berm. It's going to get a couple wheels off the ground, and it's going to force the traction control to send power to the wheel with traction. I'm going to go nice and slow, let the car figure it out. Put to the floor now. I'm all the way floored. CVT is just wailing away. Traction control feels like it's cutting power a little bit. I'm going to have to take a slightly different angle, I think. It seems to be a little bit beached. So let me go ahead and try turning traction control off. Okay, traction control turned off. We'll give it another try here. All right, that's better. Now we're moving. All right, we got one wheel in the air, but it's just spinning away. So let me try turning traction control back on and see if it'll break that wheel and get me unstuck. Oh, it's really trying. Come on, buddy. You can do it. It's really working at it. Oh, we're so close. All right, I'm gonna have to use just a little bit of momentum, I think. Now, I'm okay using momentum. I don't have an issue with it, but what I do have an issue with is the lack of approach angle in this car, which means when you use momentum, you really risk puncturing a radiator. Here we go. A little bit of speed. Just enough to crest me over this berm. There we go, come on, come on. Yes, all right, so it didn't take too much speed to get me over that obstacle, but it didn't quite have the traction to get me over the obstacle with no momentum whatsoever. Now the design of the CHR is very, how do I say, non-traditional. It's very new age, if you know what I mean. Our videographer Alex says it's trying too hard. You can kind of see what he's talking about, but let me know in the comment section below, what do you think of it? Take, for example, the rear end. You've got all these swoops and curves, and it has dual spoilers. There's one up here on top. I'm not sure that's going to do much. And there's one here on the lip itself. Now, when we're going over some rocks today at about 2 miles an hour, those are not going to be all that helpful, but they do make it look a lot more sporty than a traditional compact, subcompact crossover. The interior of the CHR is just as non-traditional as the exterior. Everything is round, everything is curvaceous. But one thing that's pretty cool is that everything in here is pretty much bespoke to the CHR. So you're not gonna find climate controls that look like this in a Camry or even like a Corolla. It even has, for example, curves on the headliner and these little leafy things. Overall, I actually really do like the interior a lot more than the exterior. Tons of funky materials like this almost wetsuit material here on the dash and these geometric patterns across the door. It's just funky cool. This is kind of the more extreme end of the terrain a lot of you may venture out with your CHR on. It's what I like to call a very aggressive dirt road. It's got a lot of holes and undulations, it's got some pointy rocks, but a lot of that you can avoid and take a relatively smooth path. On this kind of stuff, I'm pretty impressed with how the CHR performs. There's not a lot of traction difficulty out here, it's pretty flat, but the ride is super composed, and I've had a chance to drive a ton of crossovers on this kind of terrain, and I'm actually very pleased with how the CHR soaks up the bumps. On this kind of terrain, the CHR is very well suited, as would pretty much every other crossover. Something like a Kona would be happy out here, a Renegade certainly would in all of its trims, but even on this easy terrain, you can hear the gentle sound of front end scraping on stuff that you wouldn't expect scraping on. Stuff that it probably shouldn't scrape on to be classified as a crossover, or even a lifted hatchback if we're being honest. So ground clearance is clearly going to be an issue as we start progressing into the harder terrain. The rear door handle on the CHR is super well integrated into the body lines. It cuts off right here where the roof transitions from black to orange. I think this is a super cool hidden touch. Door opens up wide, and the rear seat legroom is actually not all that bad. I am 6 foot 1 inch tall. I fit in here pretty well, and even headroom is decent. Plus, I gotta love these ginormous cup holders in the rear door. Once again, just all sorts of funky materials back here. Now I have the sticker, and this CHR is in hot lava is the color code. It's the limited trim, and this one comes in at just over $26,000. This is what we call the Tombstone test. It's a steep, loose hill that we bring a lot of crossovers out to because it really pushes the limits of what a standard all-season can handle and what your typical road-going crossover can handle. Now here's the question, how far up the hill are we going to make it? Because at the very top is one of my favorite campsites in the state. It's nice and secluded, it's a great place where you'll find a lot of Subarus, and I'm curious, is the CHR going to bring us all the way up to the top, or are we going to be hopelessly stuck somewhere in the middle with just a lot of wheels spinning furiously? Now this hill is a much bigger test than the last one. First of all, I can't use momentum to simply power my way up. It's too long for that. And second of all, if I did try to power my way up, I would rip out an oil pan or I would severely damage the radiator because this car does not have the clearance or the protection for that. So I'm forced to kind of take it slowly and carefully, and we're going to see what happens. Just starting out slow at the bottom of the hill, and we are moving. Traction control light is blinking. Come on, come on, foot to the floor. You're not even at the hill yet. Get to the hill. Oh, that CVT isn't happy either. Come on, foot to the floor. You got this. Now I'm gonna try turning traction control off because it is definitely limiting power a little bit. All right, let me try taking a different line altogether here. Hopefully I've got the clearance for this line. Come on, please. Traction control back on. Let's see if that helps. It definitely does better with traction control on. Okay, foot to the floor. Oh, see, just cutting power. All right, let me back all the way down and try taking it with just a little bit of throttle. There we go, that nicely done. Yeah, this is not going anywhere. A very common off-roading trick is to let some air out of the tires, so I'm gonna give that a whirl, see if we can go any further that way. One of the downsides of this funky design and the sloping rear end is the lack of trunk room, which is a big problem in the CHR compared to its more squared off competitors like the Nissan Kicks. You don't get a lot of ability to stack larger items back here because of the trunk. This is a decent sized camera bag and it fits all right back here, but really not all that much more usability than a standard hatchback like you find in the US. Of course, underneath, space saver spare tire, a little bit of additional storage, and of course more funky geometric shapes all throughout the vehicle. I think this is supposed to be like black plastic diamond plating, which of course you put diamond plating on anything and you can go anywhere you want off-road. I do like this. It looks like this should be instructions for closing the trunk via a button, but rather it's just it's a little hand with a thumb telling you this is where you put your hand to close the trunk, so you don't get yourself all dusty, because we had to use quite a lot of dirt roads to get up to this filming location. Alright, got a low tire light, which makes sense because we let some air out of the front tires. Let's see if this will give us a little bit more traction just to get us where we need to go. Oh, a little bit. Come on. Car's always cutting power. I know you don't have a lot of it, but you've got more than you're giving me. See, traction control turned off just makes it way worse, because basically it treats it like an open differential, versus at least with traction control turned on, giving it some hope of a chance. Okay, one last try. Give it a little bit more oomph. Once again, that front end is it's not going to let me take this at 20 miles an hour like I'd like to, but we'll give it a try. Okay, we cleared it, foot to the floor, and it's going backwards. Forward, go, crawl. All right, time to try one more trick. Now, in my last video, some of you out there said that I'll have better luck if I try backing up the steep obstacle. So that's what I'm going to do now, because now basically it's acting as a rear-wheel drive vehicle. CVT is screaming. Oh, we're going farther. Foot to the floor. Yeah, this thing is totally beached. It was a good effort, car, but I don't think you're quite ready for that hill. Maybe if you grow a rear differential, but not quite yet. This 2-liter 4-cylinder really delivers good fuel economy in the city, but the downside of that is it's quite a bit pokey is the way I would describe it. We live at about 5,000 feet above sea level. It's not a quick car, and when you come up to 8,000 feet above sea level, it's even slower. It just doesn't have a lot of torque, not in the low range of the RPM band, and then by the time you get into the high range, it's taken the CVT so long to spool up that the traffic has long passed you, and it's passing maneuvers in this car are tricky. However, there are a lot of good things to like about the CHR. It's beautifully made. So, as you'd expect with Toyota, all the materials are screwed together super well. Nothing rattles, nothing creaks, even on some of these big rocks. It's also pretty fun to drive on the road, so it drives a lot more like a hatchback because it has the ground clearance more like a hatchback, and therefore it takes turns pretty well. The brakes are good, and the seats are probably one of the best in class. They're nice and supportive. This Limited has a power driver seat as well. You gotta love these kind of funky controls and this crazy shift knob that looks like it's a manual transmission shifter. That's all pretty cool stuff, but off-road, no, just I wouldn't take it off-road. And probably some of you commenters are gonna be like, no shucks, Sherlock, but that's my job here, is to see if it will live up to its crossover name. Not quite sure it will, but if you're looking for a slightly lifted hatchback, not a bad option at all. CHR, not a great off-roader, probably not a big surprise there, but I'm having a dilemma with this car because here's my issue. It's really not all that much better than a hatchback off-road because it's front-wheel drive only. Of course, you do sit up higher, which is a big plus on the road for a lot of people, especially getting in and out of the thing, but storage capacity, not all that different from like a Corolla hatchback. It's not as fun to drive as a Corolla hatchback, and price-wise, about the same, if not a little bit more expensive than a Corolla hatchback. So I think the solution here is just get a Corolla hatchback and don't go off-road, and if you do want to hit the trails, maybe check out like a RAV4 Adventure. As always, this has been Tommy with The Fascinating Car. Check out TFLcar.com for the latest and greatest in new car reviews.